Welcome to the Sword and The Trowel, a podcast of Founders Ministries. Founders Ministries exists for the recovery of the gospel and the reformation of churches. I'm Jared Longshore.
And I'm Tom Ascol.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Sword and The Trowel today. We are very excited about this podcast. We've been looking forward to this podcast for some time.
Yes, we have. We've got a wonderful special guest with us today. And before we introduce him, we want to just say also thank you to all of our Founders Alliance members and churches that support Founders Ministries. We're able to do the things we're doing because of regular ongoing support, and appreciate the partnership that you have with us. Today, we have Dr. Mark Coppenger with us.
From the great state of Kentucky.
Yes, Mark is an old friend, and I think actually is a classmate. We'll ask him about that, but I'm pretty sure that we had a couple of classes together at Southwestern Seminary. But Mark, welcome to the Sword and the Trowel.
Thanks, great to be with you.
So Mark, I was trying to just recall when I first met you, and I can't remember what class it was in, but when did you go to Southwestern Seminary?
I was there 81 to 83.
Okay. I was there doing MDiv 79 to 82 or 3, something like that.
Yeah.
And you already had your PhD when you went to MDiv, right?
Right. I got that in philosophy at Vanderbilt and taught there and taught at Wheaton for 6 years and then felt the call.
Yeah.
So, sold the house, took the kids, burned up the equity, and went to Southwestern. had the time of my life. It was wonderful.
Well,
drinking out of the fire hose.
Yeah. I wish I had known that about you at the time, because I think I figured it out midway through the semester, because whatever class it was, it may have been an ethics class or maybe a philosophy class or something, but the professor was intimidated and would, kind of tiptoe around issues. And whenever you'd ask a question, there would always be almost a deferential response to you. And I'm thinking, who is this guy? Who is this guy?
Oh, man. Well, I don't remember that. But anyway.
Yeah, no, it was great. And finally, somebody told me, said, oh, yeah, he used to teach. He taught at Vanderbilt. He taught at Wheaton. I thought, oh, this is awesome. I need to hang on to his coattails. So
if people need a quick introduction to Dr. Coppenger, you can find him online a couple places. We got to point everybody to the testimony that you gave before that. What was it, a committee of Congress or some kind of committee that was set up about drafting women into the military? So you did great stuff on that. Is there a way, can you find that on like C-SPAN or something?
Yeah, I think C-SPAN too. The text is, it was like a congressional commission on a military, national, and public service, and they're to report back this month to Congress. It was at Gallaudet University, and C-SPAN too did the thing, and it's up on their site. And then I think it's the committee has the text of what I submitted. We all submitted statements.
And we can
different places. Yeah,
we can link to that in the notes for this episode too, so that folks can find that. But Mark, in addition to teaching, you taught at Vanderbilt, didn't you, for a while?
I did when I got the doctorate. They asked me to stay on, and I worked for the National Endowment for the Humanities on a joint project with Vanderbilt, and we were taking profs from 12 colleges in Nashville out into the community to talk about ethical things. And so I was an assistant professor as well as an NEH employee, but Vanderbilt employed me, and I did that for a couple of years and then went to Wheaton.
And then you did an MDiv at Southwestern, and at some point you went to Indiana, and weren't you the executive director there for a while? Yeah,
well, I was a pastor first at El Dorado, Arkansas, First Baptist for 5 years, and then went to state exec in Indiana, 88, 89, and then to the SBC Executive Committee in public relations, convention relations for the Executive Committee, and then the Midwestern, and then church planner in Evanston, and I've been in the witness protection program, actually. I was involved in something in Philadelphia, and I had to change my name, and they moved me around.
Yeah, so by God's grace, you're one of those guys been given multiple gifts, and you've exercised them in a variety of ways for the kingdom. That's been wonderful. And again, I've appreciated you from a distance for many, many years, and was delighted to get to know you as a friend over that time as well. And especially these last few years, to see your courage, your conviction, and your determination to try to speak clearly to the issues that we are facing today. And it seems like God has equipped you both in terms of your training as well as your experience, because you got your PhD in philosophy and ethics. Is that right?
Yeah, it was actually in epistemology. And when I was, we take ethics and aesthetics. So when I got to Wheaton, that course was covered. So they had me doing all kinds of interesting things, aesthetics and philosophy of law and so forth. So I kind of moved more and more into ethics and aesthetics.
Okay. So, well, certainly epistemology is huge today as well. So give us, what do you see? You have tooled around in the evangelical world in North America quite a bit and seen things from a variety of angles. How do you assess what's going on in the evangelical world today in North America?
Well, I was reading somewhere the other day that one thing you can look at is the publishing, and it's interesting to see how evangelical publishing has changed a fair amount. I mean, it used to be that you could kind of go to the bank with, I don't know, InterVarsity, Erdman's Baker, some of these places, and then you had others that were more mainline, like Fortress Press, or even things like Orbis, or you name it. I mean, that would be more, of course, Catholic. And I did a review of a book by InterVarsity on race and the wokeness and all this kind of thing for Books at a Glance, where I work as an apologetics editor, and it was just, it had gone down the road a bit toward being a little bit too cool for me. And I remember in our church at it was Glen Ellen, Illinois, Glenfield Baptist Church, and my wife is on the committee that called Don Whitney, the pastor of all things, and we had a fellow named Harold Lindsell in our church who wrote, or was he the one that
Battle for the Bible?
Battle for the Bible. Yeah, it was Baptist in the Bible and Battle for the Bible. Right. And he was editor of Christianity Today at one time. And boy, that place has changed. That magazine's changed too. So things have popped up. I mean, you'll have, I mean, Crossway popped up, and then you have World Magazine and so forth. So it's a river that's been moving quite a bit. That's kind of interesting. I read this thing back in, I guess it was about 88, 89 in Christian Century. And somebody said, if you've got a Christian institution, a college, even a hospital, you can count on it being true to its roots for maybe 50 years or something. And then it becomes more and more secularized. And then you hand it over to the world. Like, okay, world, here's Harvard. You can have it now, or the hospitals or what have you. And he said, "Oh, you can moan about this, but that's just the way it is." They never drift into like Bob Jones. Like, what were we doing? We woke up one day and we were Bob Jones. No, it all goes the other way. And so they said, "So you just start new ones." And that's like, oh, that's kind of easy, but to sort of give up all the resources and the like, that's a big deal. So some institutions have said, no, this has not gone well. I mean, 40, 50 years in, something's gone wrong again. And so we need to make a correction. And that's what the Southern Baptist did. That's what the Missouri Synod Lutheran did. I'm sorry, early in the morning. The Missouri Synod Lutheran did. Easy for you to say. And I think some colleges have done that as well, that we're drifting. And so it's tough, but it's hard to hold it for decades and decades.
What can you give us an example of a college or two that you're thinking of that has tried to hold the line or pull back from the drift leftward?
Yeah, I've been encouraged by a number of things I've seen. By the way, my dad taught at Belmont and Carson Newman in Washita, so I'm a little campus rugrat and been around these schools a lot. And I remember there was a time when Union was not as healthy as it is now in Jackson, Tennessee, and Oklahoma Baptist University. I was over there for one of our students, a PhD fellow, had a book come out, and it was with InterVarsity. It was a good book, and they had a kind of launch event. And being on campus at OBU and following some things happening there, I'm encouraged at stuff over in Shawnee, and so there are a couple. I mean, here and there you'll see. I could name another dozen, but let me just leave with those. Okay.
Yeah, well, those are good examples. So you were very much involved in the conservative resurgence, and you you said you felt the call to ministry, and was when that happened in the early 80s. I mean, that kind of positioned you in the early years of this inerrancy movement, and you got involved pretty quickly after graduation, didn't you?
I did. I mean, this is kind of funny, but I was raised, in the cradle, so to speak, of Southern Baptist teaching, theology, and all the stuff. And I went to Wheaton, and we had an integration of faith and learning seminar. and we all had to take it or got to take it. And I was in there with Mark Knoll and some other interesting people as newcomers. And that's the first time I ever heard the expression tulip, of all things. It just wasn't an issue. And then I remember when Wheaton gave us the statement of faith to sign, I looked at it and I didn't understand a couple of parts of it. One, there was something that's no longer in there about premillennialism, and I didn't know what that meant. And so I figured out I wasn't post-mill and wasn't amill, and those are very puzzling things to me. And I kind of was to the point I just believed whatever I read last or something about that. It's been very confusing. But at any rate, I was close enough to say, okay, I can assent to that. But the other was verbal plenary inspiration. And I know what verbal means, and I know what plenary means, but inspiration. But what is that? So I called my daddy, and I read the thing, and he said, "Oh, you believe that?" and I did, and it was word by word inspired in the original autographs, and so I was happy to sign that. But I was 25 when I was learning some of these things. They just weren't issues, and so I was committed to that. Later, when I went to Midwestern, somebody said, "Well, how did you become an emeritus?" And I thought, like, what was the great turning point? And I just said, well, I just never got over Sunday school. I mean, they told me it was true, and I believed it. So at this point, I knew Linsell, and I knew the emeritus at Southern, and at Wheaton. I couldn't believe that there were people back in good old Southern Baptist life who were denying this and this and this, saying the accent didn't float, and saying this didn't matter, and we're pushing abortion and one thing after another. And I was just kind of gobsmacked. And at that point, and even in seminary, there would be people saying, well, it says that they killed everybody in I, or God said kill everybody in this town or that. And we know he wouldn't do that, or it really wasn't that kind of place, or they couldn't have fit that many people into the Sinai Desert. And I'm thinking, what is this? This is Southwestern. So slowly it came over me that something was wrong in Zion. And then that got me going, but Wheaton primed me. And then I came back and I was astonished at what I was seeing.
So, how did we get here today? What's going on in the evangelical world today, and how did we get here?
Well, I think the evangelical world is a little bit like these colleges that, they start out, I remember Hudson Armitage, the president of Wheaton, was talking about Oberlin, how it was really strong. And, with the Finney connection, I can say there could be problems there early on, but they were really strong. And then you watch him through the years, and he was saying, we don't want to become Oberlin. We don't want to drift. But the cultural push is enormous. I mean, all the applause from the media and the tenderness and the woundedness, and we want to be well thought of by the national journals and so forth, and the accreditors push us one way or the other, and then we drift. Well, I think that the culture causes evangelicalism in general to drift, and some of the stuff I've read with TGC and some of these movements and CT and the like, and some of what I hear from quote evangelicals makes me think, well, the river's moving on. And so it was a bit of a reaction against, as some people say, fundamentalist, the separation, you separate. And so but the problem is more and more we try to accommodate. And, it may be time for, people are, who was it? Wayne Grudem, I think, wrote something about the editorial from Christianity Today and sent up a flare there. I see that, I think they ran that in the Franklin Graham magazine, Wayne Grudem's pushback. So you've got to have new voices saying, what was it? Bill Buckley said, you stand in the current or something and stand athwart it and yell stop. And I think it's time for people start yelling stop.
So Mark, if you were to identify principles, certain kind of claims, truth claims that the culture around us, 21st century American culture, Western culture, holds to now that are dangerous, out of step with biblical Christianity, what are the ones that you think are beginning to encroach into evangelical life, even Southern Baptist life? So if you're saying, okay, we're gonna yell stop at this point, and a lot of our Southern Baptist brothers and sisters are going to look at us with a side eye, because they're so used to drinking in this kind of thing. What would be those points?
Well, some people talk about postmodernism, where it's your truth, my truth. I've experienced this. I can speak for my truth. You can't tell me about your truth and impose your truth on my truth, or what have you. So there's a bit of that where relativism is where you end up. It's more power plays. You had the Bloom book, Closing of the American Mind, where the only thing that can get you on campus, make you a pariah, is if you are perceived to be intolerant on some point. I mean, you could be lazy, you could be mendacious, you could be drunk, you can be promiscuous and so forth, and still be homecoming king or queen. But if you draw a line and say this is out of bounds, then you're toxic, and so you get into this kind of relativism. We're very, very much keyed to feelings now, and if somebody's wounded and everybody's triggered and looking for safe spaces and this kind of thing. And that is, even the way they interview people, like, well, how do you feel? And that's your race car slipped over 13 times, and somebody stole your dog and this and that. How do you feel? How do you feel? And so we're feelings and sensitivity obsessed. And we've drunk deep at that well. I think sometimes you could say the patron saint now of evangelicalism is Barnabas. God bless Barnabas. Thank God for Barnabas. But God didn't let him write scripture. Paul had a jerking-out in him, and Peter's led Barnabas astray. And I think when he was born, he asked his mommy if it hurt, or something. And I think that's we're really big into that. I was thinking about the kind of the reverse Rehoboam, when Solomon died, and they said, "Well, he's going to be as mean as your daddy." He said, "You haven't seen anything yet." I think we're going the other way. Are you going to be as rough as those guys who worked the resurgence is, "Oh no, listen, those guys, I'm telling you, we're embarrassed. I mean, God bless them and thank you for this, but now we're the new day of sensitivity. Sensitivity is king. That's a big deal." But yeah, I just it strikes me. You remember when they had the Chicago Statement on biblical inerrancy? They put down stakes there, but they had to hurry and have the Chicago Statement on hermeneutic, because you can do cute things with the Bible. Even the Metropolitan Community Church would say, "Oh no, we believe there was a problem in Sodom, but it was inhospitality. Send your visitors out that we might have fellowship with them." No, you can't do it. Well, that's in. And then they'll go to Romans 1 and say, they gave up their natural desires, and they're like, "Well, sure. So if you're, if you're naturally homosexual and then you go hetero, then you violated Romans 1. So you can do all kinds of tricks with the Bible, and that's where our real problem is now. You got all kinds of people saying the Bible's true, but I think they're fudging and they're doing some eisegesis here and there. But again, with that underlying, but let me just say this too. I think that PR is king too. That we have got to sell this thing. I could say more about that, but we're a very PR oriented society, very sensitivity driven, and we can find all kinds of theological reasons for talking that way. But I think it's really taking us down the river.
Mark, you've touched on something I think is significant, and it's becoming increasingly clear to me. We've got people who will advocate positions that historically have been way out of bounds for Orthodox Christianity, and do so saying, but we signed the Chicago Statement on inerrancy, or we've signed the Baptist Faith and Message, or we've signed the Nashville Statement. So how can a person endorse Revoice and sign the Nashville Statement? What's going on in a person's thinking like that? If you had to try to evaluate it.
Yeah, I'm a little leery of statement. I believe in them, confessional things and signing them and the like, but having been a trustee at Southern back in 87, 88, I can tell you, you can sign all kinds of stuff and then play games in your mind, or talk one way in the campus and then put a shine on when you go speak in the pulpit. But I've heard some really, really interesting things done. I won't name names or places, but somebody, what was it? Somebody said in one of the Dort documents, there was condemnation of the Anabaptist heresy, and somebody says, "Look, I'm against heresy anytime. If if the Anabaptists had one, then I'm against it." I'm like, whoa, wait a second. Or people can just say, "Yeah, I mean, in a sense, yeah, close enough," or that kind of thing. So we can play games with that sort of thing. I think sometimes it's really dishonesty. Other times I think it's a matter of finessing things in one's mind.
What about a sincere person? Because I believe there's some real sincere people that I've talked to and disagreed with, and they don't see it. It's like there's something in the foundation of approaches that is radically different from my own, and it's hard to come to a meeting of the minds.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's some really, really serious godly people we disagree with on things. I mean, I have good friends who are Presbyterians who believe in paedobaptism, and I think they're serious. I don't think they're going wink, wink at all. So people can be really muddled. By the way, someone said, "Do you believe in infant baptism?" Like, believe in it. Heck, I've seen it. I believe in sincere disagreements on what the Bible says. Well, I've seen it. It's surely there. But in other cases, it just seems. What was the one about the Baptist Faith and Message? It's truth without mixture of error. And someone says, "Oh, listen. I mean, if there's any error." I mean, I believe in the truth that's not mixed with error. Right. So if there's error in the Bible, that's not part of it.
It's not mixed.
It's like, wait. That's a game. So I think there's some gamesmanship. I think people love their jobs. They love their status, and they'll knuckle under and kind of go along. But I some of this stuff is just so familiar. I mean, the women's thing. I was reading the old 1984 resolution, and I think it was largely written by Carl Henry. Back in the day, I was a brand new pastor, and they brought it to the convention. And I remember I went back to my church in Arkansas, and kind of a feminist lady said, "Did you see that resolution?" And by the way, it was I guess tighter than the BFM 2000, and it talked about objecting to women in positions of ordination. And it wasn't just like senior pastors or what have you. And so I was back saying, "Well, yeah, but it had scriptural basis. You voted for it?" I said, "Yes." And it turns out, without getting into much detail, a significant chunk of our church budget went away with that very statement. And yet you just stay with the stuff. And God continued to bless. But I really liked, that was back kind of before country was cool, back early in the struggle, but Carl Henry was on that committee, and I liked the way we spoke back then.
Yeah. Well, this has been very helpful, Dr. Coppenger. I know that you, having experienced and walked through the conservative resurgence and then trying to understand what was going on back then and then relate it to what's going on now. So thank you for joining us today. What we want to do, I actually want to take a deeper dive into this with you, and I've been thinking a lot about the connection between kind of I guess what could be called the social justice ethic and then the social justice philosophy. So the actual worldview of people around us and the worldview that seems to be creeping into the church in certain ways. And since you are a former professor of ethics and philosophy, I really get into what is secular humanism? How are people thinking around us? Maybe like a David Wells kind of thing, No Place for Truth, and maybe you highlighting some stuff at a deeper level than we've been able to get into in this podcast. So if you'll hang around, we want to do an extended interview with you, but this is going to be up on the Armory, folks. So for those who are Founders Alliance members, you have access to this content. Go to founders.org. We'll be uploading it there soon. If you're not a Founders Alliance member and you want to get access to that armor, we've just dropped an interview with Vodi Bakum.
Mark as well.
Mark Coppenger from our By What Standard footage, and Dr. Tom Nettles, extended interviews. I think some of them are an hour long, some are 30 minutes. And so go to founders.org, join the fam, get access to that armory. So stick around for just a few minutes with us, Dr. Coppenger, and I'd like to get into this. You can bring out some of those big terms that you know that can kind of educate us a little bit.
Thanks so much for being with us, Mark.
Thank you.
Also, before we sign off today, we want to remind you that we have going on for the rest of this week a matching gift for the Wield the Sword initiative that we are getting underway in the next couple of weeks. Someone has graciously provided $10,000 that they will give if we can provide matching gifts for that. So if you're interested in supporting that initiative, this week would be the time to do it, because it will actually double the amount of money that you give. So you can go to founders.org, click on Wield the Sword, and you can find more information there. But we would greatly appreciate it if you'd help us take advantage of this opportunity.